exonerated 2 people, helped free 5 more people through other legal means, and helped pass legislation pertaining to videotaping of interrogations and improving identification procedures. Jeff's body of work includes delivering 200 presentations, authoring more than 200 articles and 9 different publications, meeting with elected officials and testifying in legislative hearings, and participating in uncountable television, radio, and print media interviews. Let's go up to him for that. I'm still going. I just thought maybe you wanted an applause for it. In effect, trading privacy in exchange for awareness, Jeff, a BA in Behavioral Science from Mercy College, and an MA from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which includes, and I know these lights keep going on and off, so I'm so sorry all night, that's distracting. Wrongful conviction causes and reforms needed to shore up those cracks in the system. Certified as an instructor in New Jersey police academies, Jeff instructed 7 soon-to-be graduating classes of police officers in ethics and best practices, and has twice co-taught the wrongful conviction course at Rockland Community College. Jeff previously won New Yorker of the Week, the 2015 Humanitarian of the Year, and is listed in the John Jay College of Criminal Justice books, 50 at 50, which features 50 alumni who embody the John Jay mission, compassion and commitment to service. Jeff also won the 2018 Distinguished Alumnus Award from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Executive Director of the Survival's Guide to Prison. Jeff is an advisory board member of the It Can Happen to You Coalition, which spearheaded the effort at passing legislation to create a commission on prosecutorial conduct, currently awaiting signing by Governor Cuomo. Get your shit together, Cuomo, and also stop the pipeline through the New York City Harbor. Sorry, small plug for the environment there, just because Cuomo sucks. Okay. Jeff is a 3rd-year law student at the Elizabeth Hub School of Law at Pace University in pursuit of his dream of exonerating others as an attorney. Jeff dedicated his life to fighting wrongful conviction because he spent 16 years in prison from age 17 to 32 for a murder and rape in Peekskill here in Westchester County, or north of us, Westchester County, losing the trial in White Plains prior to exoneration through DNA testing that identified the actual perpetrator. Please welcome Jeffrey.
All right, well, it's been a wild night. Wow, it's got to be the most unusual gig I've ever been associated with. But listen, the show must go on, and I do thank everyone for sticking around to listen to me. So thank you very much. So before launching into my story, I just want to recognize a couple of special people here in the audience tonight. So the first person the foundation ever freed, a resident of Brooklyn who did 25 years on a murder he didn't commit. We were able to persuade the parole board that he was in fact innocent. We're working on exonerating him now. I just want to recognize John Whitfield is with us here tonight. And if you think it's easy to convince the parole board that someone's innocent and that they're going to release somebody, with them standing on their innocence as opposed to expressing remorse and taking responsibility. If you think that that's an easy thing, you should know that it's not. That usually the already unjust prison stay is lengthened, so that was no easy thing to free John in that way. We're 4 for 9 on such efforts, by the way, which is not that bad if you want to put it as a batting average. But another person here from Brooklyn, speaking of wrongful convictions, and by the way, there's been when former Brooklyn DA Ken Thompson passed away, he exonerated 23 people in 2.5 years as a DA, and there's been 3 or 4 exonerations since then. So Brooklyn here has been a hotbed of wrongful conviction, with some people getting justice not anywhere near enough. Of course, we've had the rogue detective Louis Scarcella, who 12 or 13 people have been exonerated. He uses the same sole eyewitness who's been a drug addict involved in prostitution. She's always in the right place at the right time to hear her tell it. The sole eyewitness in 7 cases. So another aspect supporting the idea that Brooklyn is a hotbed of wrongful conviction. But sometimes, once in a while, some of us break through, including people here from Brooklyn that actually are exonerated. And so to that effect, I just want to give a recognition. I always love to acknowledge other exonerees in the room when they come. The same way I like to be recognized. So Cy Green from Brooklyn, who did 25 years prior to being exonerated, is here tonight. Cy, stand for a second, please. Joining us to the shot of her, please. Cy Green from Brooklyn survived 25 years and was exonerated. He was proven innocent. He was proven innocent, and he's still fighting to be compensated. He has been home for 13 years, and if you go into the National Registry of Exoneration, you'll see that his story is actually there. In 1989, a classmate of mine was found murdered and raped. Peekskill was a small city with a population of approximately 25,000 people. Murders were very rare. So when this murder happened, it understandably created an atmosphere of fear, rumor, and paranoia. Parents were concerned with their own safety as well as the safety of their children. In high school, I was quiet. I was to myself. I didn't participate in very many organized sports. This made me seem strange to the kids in the school. In the course of the police investigation, the police interviewed many students. Some of those students told the police that they might want to talk to me because I seemed strange to them. This is what the police said initially attracted them to me. The other factor was they said attracted them to me. They said that I was overly upset at the victim having been murdered. Yet, they had mental health facilities set up all throughout the city of Peekskill in Westchester County, New York, to help people process what had happened. Again, keeping in mind that murders were very rare. An additional reinforcement factor was that the police asked the NYPD to put together a psychological profile of what the actual perpetrator, what their psychological characteristics would be, and as it turned out, I managed to match that psychological profile, so that was kind of like a reinforcing factor. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they talked to me as a suspect, and the other half the time they would pretend to need my help to solve the crime. They would say things like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear any rumors. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and then congratulate me on my opinion being correct. They made me the center of attention. They made me feel important. I came from a single-parent household, and that directly intersected with the good cop, bad cop technique, otherwise known as Mutt and Jeff, in which one officer takes on a more aggressive role, and his partner pretends to be opposed to what's going on, yet somehow powerless to intervene. And of course, the purpose of this tactic is that when the person being questioned becomes frightened, it's only natural that you would look to a friendly face for existence. Another factor was that the fantasy career, pre-teenage years, the career that I wanted to be. I wanted to be a cop when I grew up. And so this unexpected early opportunity to do this quasi-police work, along with my age, which was 16, was how the police were able to pull the wool over my eyes as to the absurdity that a 16-year-old could, in fact, assist them to solve a homicide. So they got me to agree to take a polygraph test by telling me that some new information had come into the police file and that they wanted to share that with me and that this would put me in better position to help them. So help us to help you to help them, type of logic was employed. So the next day, rather than report to high school, I instead went to the police station where I had heard through rumor that the other people had been polygraphed. And so, because it was a school day, neither my mother nor my grandmother called around looking for me. As far as they were concerned, I was in school. They drove me to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County, whereas I was a native of Peekskill in Westchester County. And the reason why that's important is that that meant that I was no longer able to leave. Put me in a small room. I didn't have an attorney present. I wasn't given anything to eat the entire time I was there. So there were 3 officers that had came there from Peekskill with me that I knew were cops, but then there was the sheriff's investigator who was dressed as a civilian who was pretending not to be a cop. So from there, he gave me countless cups of coffee, and it seems pretty clear in hindsight that the purpose of that was to get me nervous. And then he attached me to a polygraph machine, so now I'm immobile, I can't move around. And then he launches into his third-degree tactics. So he raises his voice at me, he invades my personal space, he keeps asking me the same questions over and over again. As each hour passes, so too does my fear increase in proportion to the time. Towards the end of the interrogation, he made a statement to me. He said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the polygraph test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." When he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof. And at that moment, who should make his grand appearance other than the officer who had been pretending to be my friend? He told me that the other cops were going to harm me, but that he was holding them off, but could not do so indefinitely. You have to help yourself here. Do you understand? Well, considering that I had maintained my innocence for the previous 6.5 to 7 hours, it was clear what he meant by that. They wanted me to confess. When it was added that if I did as they wanted, that not only would they stop what they're doing, but that I could go home afterwards, that I was not going to be arrested, being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, instead just being concerned with my own safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was, that nobody else knew where I was either, loomed very large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically, and then there was the push-pull dynamic in place, because on the one hand, there was the possibility of harm, and then on the other, there's this false life preserver that he threw me. So in the end, I decided to make up a story based upon information which they had given both that day and in the 6 weeks run up to it, as well as items in the newspaper. By the end of the interrogation, I was curled up into a fetal position on the floor, crying uncontrollably. Needless to say, I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape. So before I went to trial, the results of a DNA test came in from the FBI lab showing that semen found in the victim didn't match. But rather than acknowledge they made a mistake, they instead continued to prosecute full speed ahead. In order to explain away this DNA evidence that didn't match me, the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud. Basically, 6 months after doing this autopsy and initially committing his notes to paper, he suddenly remembers, in order to help the prosecutor get around this DNA test, he suddenly remembers that there was medical evidence showing that the victim had been sexually active, which the prosecutor used to then argue that it didn't matter, that the semen didn't match me. That didn't mean I was innocent. That just meant it was yet another person that she must have slept with prior to being murdered and raped. So basically, in order to wrongfully convict me, the prosecutor was willing to trash the reputation of the victim, and the medical examiner was willing to commit fraud to facilitate that. Taking it a step further, he actually named another person by name that he claimed had had this encounter with the victim. But yet he never had a DNA test performed in order to prove that. He didn't even call him as a witness to give verbal testimony to that effect. He simply made the unsupported argument to the jury. At the same time, the public defender that I had was terrible. Basically, he didn't defend me. He never interviewed nor called as a witness my alibi. I was actually playing wiffle ball with a crime to tell him that I was innocent of what happened in the interrogation room. He was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. When it was time to cross-examine this medical examiner and to discredit him, which would have obviously been important in order to make the DNA evidence stand up, he instead stood up in open court with a great smile on his face, as if him and the medical examiner were great friends from back in the day, said to him, "Well, you're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you." He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to argue that this so-called confession was coerced and false. He should have never represented me in the first place because of a conflict of interest, in that this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely claiming had sex with the victim was represented not only by another member of legal aid, but also specifically by the attorney who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. Add it all up, I guess it wasn't too surprising that the jury found me guilty. I'll never forget the day I was found guilty. I felt like I was in some sort of nightmarish alternative reality, because to my way of thinking, at least up until that point in time, only the guilty were convicted. Yet, they said what they did, and I was taken into custody. On the day of the sentencing, I begged the judge to overturn the verdict because I was innocent, and I referenced the DNA to support my contention. He actually told me, on the record, "Maybe you are innocent," conceding there was a doubt. How could there not be a doubt? The DNA didn't match me. You might think that that would lead him to step up for justice and exercise his discretion by overturning the conviction, which he could have done by overturning any number of rulings that he had made against me in the course of the trial. But instead, he took the easy, politically expedient way out, which was to sentence me to a term of imprisonment of 15 to life. So I'm going to share a few slides with you. I'm going to push the computer forward, do your best. But the reason for the slides is because I'm an adult now, okay? But this is not who I was when all this happened. Hold down.
Yep, I got it.
You sure?
Yep.
All right, so this is my mugshot, if everyone can see. Joe me so. This is my mugshot. This is who we're talking about. Turning to the next slide, this is what I looked like in court when it was announced that the jury had reached a verdict, but prior to the verdict having been read. If anyone wants to move up, I'll hold for a second. You guys can see. We were supposed to have a projector, but things happened. So we're making, the show must go on. So this is what I looked like in court, so everyone can understand. So the next slide, this is me in court. This is what I looked like when I was given a 15 to life sentence because I was charged as an adult and therefore I was sent to a men's maximum security prison. Going to the next slide, this is what I looked like in a men's maximum security prison in Elmira. Turn one more slide. And this is what I looked like when I was exonerated and released. So if you go backwards, you see like a before, go back, and you can see the after. So let's park it there for a second. Okay. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about my prison experience. I still remember the first day. I remember having on handcuffs and a chain around my waist. And I remember my legs being fastened together as well as fastened to the prisoner on the bus next to me. I remember how large the prison wall loomed and how menacing the barbed wire appeared. I don't mind sharing with you that I was really frightened. Yet the wheels of the bus kept turning, bringing me closer and closer to, and eventually into, the prison. As I walked down the cell gallery, there were many prisoners there whose arms were as big as my legs. Didn't take a lot of figuring on my part to realize that if any of them decided to assault me, that at 17 years of age, looking at as what I did, that I was in no position to fight off grown adult men, especially not those who had, were guilty of committing very serious violent crimes. I also had the built-in handicap of knowing that if any of the prisoners discovered what I was incarcerated for, which was a rape along with the murder, that would be a motivation on their part to assault me because in prison there's a vigilante mentality towards people who have been convicted of sex offenses. The guards themselves were obstacles. To be sure, some were professional and did their job. Yet there were others who brought their problems into the workforce and displaced their aggression onto the prisoners. Then there were other guards that even their peers disliked because the manner in which they conducted themselves on a day-to-day basis made it likely that prisoner-to-staff violence could occur or that a riot could ensue. But nobody ever bothered to reel them in. Not their co-workers nor the people who supposedly were there to supervise them. Then there were other guards who just wanted to do their 8 hours and go home, and they didn't care what happened while they were there. While that might sound like an ideal attitude that you'd want a guard to have if you had to be incarcerated, it didn't actually work out that way in real life because it would not be unusual for them to literally look the other way and walk in the opposite direction when violence was occurring, so as to be able to avoid breaking things up and having to file paperwork afterwards. There was a lot of violence in the prison. There was a lot of gang activities. There were 3 or 4 stabbings or cuttings every day. There was plenty of violence that didn't involve weapons. So taken cumulatively, there was a general atmosphere of violence and adrenaline that permeated the air. There was a system of maintaining order in the prison known as keep lock, which involved a variety of sanctions being imposed on the prisoners if they were found guilty of having broken a prison rule. Those sanctions included being kept in the cell 23 hours a day out of the 24. They would send you less food. Sometimes the food would be 3 or 4 days old. Their idea of complying with the court-mandated 1 hour a day recreation consisted of putting the prisoners in a small caged area with maybe a pull-up bar in it, if you were lucky. You would not be able to use the phone or call your family or call anybody while you were on that status. There were several times in the course of my incarceration I was assaulted, one time in which I nearly lost my life. In addition to dealing with that physicality, I was also subjected to those sanctions because in prison, if you were trying to defend yourself, then of course, that meant you were fighting. Towards the end of my sentence minimum, the corrections counselor told me that if I wanted to have any chance at all at making parole, which was already a slimmer than slim possibility as it was, I would have to take and complete the sex offender training program. But the problem with completing that program, though, was that there was a guilt admission requirement tied to it. Everybody in the program would be expected to admit guilt, not just the instructor, but to the other prisoners. Simply saying one was guilty wouldn't cut it. They wanted a verbal rendition. And then simply saying that one was guilty also wasn't enough. They wanted all the details. Failure to complete any aspect of that would result in immediate removal from the program, with the prisoner being deemed to have refused to have completed the program. So as you might imagine, that was a difficult catch-22 position for me to be in, because certainly I wanted to regain my freedom before anybody in my family passed away. And by that point in my sentence, I was beginning to look at parole as a possible means of regaining my freedom. When I was initially incarcerated, my mother used to make the 4.5 hour trip from Peekskill to Elmira. But as the long years grated on her and things tightened up a little bit financially, and she experienced a few health problems with her feet and her back, I began to see her less and less, until eventually I was lucky if I saw her once every 6 months. My grandmother was the only one who really came to see me consistently with my mother, but then in 1996, she passed away while I was in prison. My brother is 3.5 years younger than I am, and he also was impacted by my wrongful conviction. The kids in the school bus and in the school used to tell him that his brother was a rapist, and they used to try to hit him and stab him with pencils and say other nasty things. I guess being unable to get to me, he was the next best thing. When I went to the parole board, I knew that the parole board was rubber stamp denying applications, even from prisoners who could demonstrate that they had been rehabilitated, and if released, they would not pose any threat to society. So they would go to the parole board, be turned down, and reappear 2 years later, and then be turned down again, and have this cycle continue in a seemingly never-ending cycle, raising the issue of my innocence and citing the DNA. But they were not willing to consider even the mere possibility that I was innocent. Towards the end of the interview, they asked me a question about an aggression replacement training program, and I was able to give them the answer, demonstrating that I learned the material in the shop. That's when a different commissioner piped up and said, "Well, that's good, Mr. Deskovic, because you're going to need those skills once you return back to society. Good luck." So the procedure is that they don't inform you of the decision right then and there on the spot. It's instead sent via institutional mail 3 days later. So considering how that interview ended, I actually walked around the prison for the next 3 days thinking that I had somehow defied the odds and would be going home. When I got the decision in the mail, it noted that I had a good disciplinary record, that I had an excellent educational record, that I had some letters of support, that I even had a recommendation letter from a prison employee recommending that I be released, but that nonetheless I'd been convicted of a brutal and senseless crime, and to release me, they wrote, would be to somehow lessen its seriousness. They ordered me to appear in front of them 2 years later. Now at that point, considering that I knew a lot of prisoners working on years 25 and 30 off of a 15 to life sentence, where that perpetuity was going on that I already described, I felt pretty confident that I was going to die in prison for a crime I didn't commit. Changing gears, I'd like to share with you how it was that I came to be exonerated. While all that was happening, and much, much more, which we're going to cut just for brevity, I was simultaneously appealing my case throughout the court system. I naively thought that the court system got better and more accurate the higher up that you went, but I quickly learned that that, in fact, was not the case. So I went to the appellate division, where my primary issues on appeal were my innocence, wrapped around the DNA, different legal arguments around my innocence, and that my Fifth Amendment rights had been violated by the manner in which I had been questioned. And then there was 6 issues of law, which are not really worth going over right now. So the court ruled that I was not in custody, that I was free to come and go as I wanted, and as a result of that, that affected their analysis, and they ruled that the statements were voluntary. They ruled that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which is kind of a head-scratcher still, because how do you find overwhelming evidence of guilt when it comes to somebody who's factually innocent? But the court managed to do that. They got rid of my other 6 issues of law with 1 sentence. They said that they had looked at my remaining contentions and found them either to be without merit or not preserved for review. And they ruled against me 5-0. Now, as terrible as that decision was, that was the most that any court ever wrote, although I had 6 more appeals. My re-argument motion was denied in 1 word, denied, because my lawyer argued that their ruling was running contrary to the facts of the law, but they didn't want to hear that. They just wrote denied. The Court of Appeals, New York State's highest court, the procedure is you have to get permission from them to appeal before they'll agree to actually give you a ruling on the merits of it. And so The Court of Appeals wrote that they didn't see any merit in law to justify reviewing my case, and so therefore they were declining to give me permission to appeal to them. I lost in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedure, and as a result of that, my petition arrived 4 days too late, which the district attorney at the time in Westchester, Janine Pirro, who has a pair of judge shows on television, her office took the position that those 4 days were somehow prejudicial to the government, and therefore the court should really not even waste their time. I was late, let's not entertain him, right? And that's the position that the court took. Now my situation has just gone from bad to worse. Now I'm time barred, which means I can't argue my issues directly anymore. I'm relegated to arguing that this procedural ruling against me was inaccurate. So I appealed the ruling to the Federal Court of Appeals. I got permission to appeal to them as to the procedural ruling, and the judges there were Rosemary Pooler and future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. And my lawyer advanced 3 arguments as to why the procedural ruling against me should be reversed. So the first one was that this was not a delay caused by me and my attorney, but in fact by the court clerk. Well, I don't think we need to have a legal education or law degree to be lawyers to know that that's a valid argument. The second argument was that she argued that upholding a ruling like that would cause a miscarriage of justice to continue, which kind of, as a contextual issue, indirectly raises the issue of my innocence and the DNA. And the third issue she argued was that overturning the procedural ruling would open the door for more sophisticated DNA testing of the type which would go on to clear me 7 years later. So once again, the DA opposed, and once again the court ruled with the district attorney. My lawyer moved to re-argue the case in front of them, requesting that all the judges on the circuit hear the case and make a ruling. So that was in front of those same 2 judges. En banc is the legal term. But all the 2 judges, again, turned me down, which meant I had one more court left to go to, the United States Supreme Court, where they agreed to hear only between 2 to 5% of the total number of cases that come in front of them. But having no other court left to go to, we had no choice but to forge ahead. Well, I was not able to overcome the odds. As expected, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to give me permission to appeal to them. That marked the end of appeals and the end of legal representation. That was in 2001. The path, therefore, at that stage would be that I would have to find an attorney to represent me for free, because I didn't have any money to hire one. Hope I could find an investigator who would work on a similar basis, and then hope that in tandem the 2 of them could find some previously unknown evidence of innocence, without which I was permanently locked out of the court, unless, of course, there was some kind of retroactive change in the law. But barring any one of those 2 things, I was permanently locked out of the courthouse. So I wrote letters for 4 years, very rarely getting any answers. I wrote large law firms, I wrote non-profit organizations, I wrote reporters, I wrote faith-based organizations. I wrote anyone and everyone I could possibly think of. If I could come up with a chain of events that somebody could set in motion, right? The first move that leads to another move, which ultimately culminated in my getting the substantive legal representation I needed, I wrote the letter, I took the shot, and that was my legal work for 4 years. I wrote hundreds of letters, rarely getting a response back. In the end, I wound up with legal representation kind of through a fluke. So I was writing a book author in care of the publishing company, but somebody at the publishing company, instead of sending it to the author, who had been a warden of a men's maximum security prison in California, and she had written her memoirs, and her contact info in care of the publishing company was in the back of the book. So I thought, well, this might be somebody that her walk of life would lend her to coming in contact with somebody who could assist me, either that she knew already or that she might come in contact with in the future. But instead, someone at the publishing company sent a letter to an investigator who worked out of Colorado and Maine. And the investigator explained to me that she was too far away to work on my case directly, but that she would try to network me to the necessary help. And so she suggested I write the Innocence Project again, which is a national organization in Manhattan that works to free wrongfully convicted prisoners in those cases in which DNA testing can demonstrate innocence and in which no prior testing had been conducted. So she not only suggested that I write them, but she also lobbied them, and she got other respected legal entities to lobby them. But then I also got lucky because one of the intake workers there, who was not a lawyer, also represented my case 3 times to the lawyers, so because they didn't want to take my case because of the pre-existing DNA exclusion. So for about 6 months, while this went back and forth, right, I had no idea what was going on, and then I suddenly, out of the blue, they wrote me back and they told me that they were taking my case. So getting the representation was the first most significant thing. The second thing is Pirro left office, and her successor was not invested in my case, and actually, as I've come to understand it, she didn't like Pirro, and Pirro was in the middle of her Attorney General race, so why not give me the testing and hope that I'm exonerated and ruin her run, is what the backstory was. And Barry Scheck, another Brooklyn resident, was at that point was a much bigger figure than the Westchester DA was publicly. So that's kind of like the backstory of why I was given the testing. So that's the second factor. The third thing was I got lucky that the actual perpetrator killed a second victim 3.5 years later, who was a school teacher and a mother of 2. And that resulted in his DNA being put in the databank. So in a way, you might look at it like someone else died for me to get free. So on September 20th, 2006, my conviction was overturned and I was released. I reported back to court November 2nd, 2006, at which point all the charges against me were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. And so that's this is right here, this is the one. This is the slide right here of when I was exonerated. Okay, so my mission in life is to fight wrongful conviction, free wrongfully convicted people. So this is a picture here when I got some financial compensation. After 5 years of fighting for it, I decided to open the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, whose purpose is to fight wrongful conviction, free people, and prevent this from happening to other people. So in keeping with the theme that this can happen to anybody, right here, the gentleman right here, that's Fernando Bermudez, who was exonerated after 18 years in a Manhattan wrongful conviction case. To my left over here, another resident of Brooklyn, that's Jabbar Collins, who was exonerated after 16 years in prison in a Brooklyn case. And over here, you might recognize Raymond Santana from Central Park 5 fame, who was exonerated also. So in our 5.5 years, we have freed 7 people, so we'll show a little slide. So this is William Lopez, who, again, wow, I didn't even really think about this many Brooklyn crossovers, but William Lopez was exonerated for 23.5 years. He was another Brooklyn resident, another Brooklyn case. They basically stole his adult life from him. So Lopez was exonerated. We exonerated him in collaboration with his pre-existing lawyers. He passed away after like 1.5 years of being free after fighting 23.5 years. So next slide is William Hawhey over here, who was exonerated after 8 years and 4 months on an arson case that actually was. And graduated John Jay with a master's degree. Changing slides again. So the fight against wrongful conviction is as against rogue cops and rogue prosecutors. It's not anti-law enforcement. And so this is a case in point of one of the presentations I've done in front of police academies on ethics and best practices. So obviously they buy into it. They've done 7 of those. And the next slide from there, okay, is me outside the law library at Pace, where I'm finishing up the law degree in pursuit of the dream. So changing gears, I want to share just a little bit with you about my life since then. That's it, we're done with those slides. So just sharing a little bit about my life since then. So it's very difficult to put your life back together again after being through a traumatic experience like that, particularly one that lasted as long as it did. So it's common in terms of psychological after effects of PTSD, panic attacks, anxiety, fear on seeing law enforcement, feeling of processing things at a much slower speed, a feeling of having been frozen in time. So I went to counseling for 4 hours a week for 6 years to get to be where I am now, that you see. I was really never able to obtain gainful employment. It was very hard to find work. I mean, the employers all seemed to want somebody who could hit the job, who could hit the ground running. None of them were patient, as far as on-the-job training. And then on top of that, the technology had passed me by. I had no job history. So the cumulative effect of the technology being different, the culture being changed, neighborhoods not looking like they used to look, people that I used to know not inhabiting those areas no more, all that taken together as a whole. Have you ever read like a comic book, like one of the What If series or alternative realities or universes? So it's often felt like, I'm in a different parallel world that I haven't quite belonged to. There's the stigma. There's a stigma attached to it. I mean, not a lot of people question my innocence, mainly because the authorities arrested the actual perpetrator and he was convicted and sentenced for the crime, although there's still people that doubt that. But it's more on the level, on a stigmatic level. So you were there in 16 years wrongfully, yes. But you were there for 16 years though. How much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? So when it comes to, you know, personal life, and yes, it has been kind of a challenge in terms of putting things back together again. It's kind of an awkward experience when I see my immediate extended family, when you spend large periods of time away from people and they from you, so the changes in natural growth and evolution, it becomes much more pronounced. So although I know who they are intellectually from memories when I was younger, you know, they're different people now, and I'm a different person at all. So in terms of trying to just put some color to what it is that I've missed, so just think about graduating high school, the prom, births, deaths, weddings, rites of passage, finishing education at a more traditional age, being on your way to a career. So those are all things, you know, that passed me by that I've had to try to put together as best as I could. When they release you without anything. It took me 5 years to get some compensation. I've been home for 12 years, and you know, a lot of the prisoner reentry organizations, you know, they'll help people on parole and probation. They will not help people who are exonerated. So really, there wasn't any help there. I think that the state should help people immediately upon release. I think it's their obligation. So things like housing, cost of living, dental care, doctor, mental health services, job training, job placement, on vocational, public transportation. I think all those things should be part of the package. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, 2,272 people were exonerated. That was the figure as of a couple of weeks. It's probably moved up since then. It seems like there's 2 or 3 people being exonerated each week. So no, in fact, I don't consider myself to be a rarity. I'm a rarity in the sense that I made it out, okay? But it's not a rarity in terms of the total number of people that made it out, and it's much more people than that did not make it out. So listen, I think I'm getting the sign, okay? So
No, I left because of people getting out.
okay, I see. All right. Well, there's a little bit more I'd like to share. So if I got a minute or two,
Yeah, of course.
I can. Yeah. So I'd just like to, you know, briefly say that, you know, we did get the oversight. You know, we got the oversight bill on the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct passed, and we're now going to turn our attention to discovery reform. So basically, legalese aside, we feel that the defense should have the same access to the same information the prosecution does. From the moment they arraign you and announce what the charge is, everybody should have access to the same information. That's how it happens in New Jersey. This way a trial really can be about a search for truth rather than this haphazard way. They withhold evidence all the time. They wait up until the last minute. Coerced false confessions are the cause of wrongful convictions in 25% of the cases. I want everyone to leave here tonight knowing what to do if the cops want to talk to you. You know, you give your name, where you live, and the next thing should be you want a lawyer. Okay, so there's, you know, people think that if you're not guilty of anything and you don't know anything about a crime, well, yeah, sure. Why would you not talk to a cop? What's the worst that can possibly happen? Well, actually, look at me and you can see quite a bit, actually. You need to invoke your rights, wait for them to give you a lawyer. There's nothing they need to talk to you about that's that urgent, that can't wait until you're provided with a lawyer that'll level the playing field, it'll prevent coercion from happening. The innocence of people often works against them, and they don't invoke their rights, and I think that if they do invoke, then it's going to make them look guilty, and then cops try to talk you out of your rights. But you got to stick to your guns. It's really, really important. You know, we need to have evidence to be preserved. I mean, sometimes there's a literal trashing of the truth. So we need to have a better system of public defense. And it's not unusual for one lawyer to represent 100 people at the same time. We need to limit the caseloads. We need to have equal playing field between the district attorney's office and the public defender's office in terms of manpower, in terms of resources. We got to give both sides equal pay. So we can't send a message that, well, being a prosecutor is a more important job than being a defense lawyer, when actually they're both very, very essential. So look, thank you very much.
Yeah.
exonerated prisoners in the crowd come up on stage? Or here? Just like come up and share the stage for a moment. I don't know.
Let's get a photo. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, there's someone else here. I don't know if you have like any quick words you want to share. That was a pretty powerful presentation. Rape and murder is awful. As a woman, as a survivor of domestic and sexual assault, like these are not things I take lightly. However, searching for people who are easy targets is also not okay. So thank you for staying with that process, using it, teaching us about it, and I hope we can all take strides and support you and other people and in our own lives as well. So I'm sorry, I don't have as good of words as you, but thank you so much for doing what you do and getting free. I don't know, do you have anything to say?
Briefly, I'm gonna be very briefly. My name is John Whitfield, Devon Whitfield, and I just want to say it's been a huge journey, and I'm on my way of becoming exonerated. I spent 25 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit, and the amazing thing is that the DA and them had all this evidence, man. It was shocking. It took me 15 years inside to find the evidence, which showed conclusively that I had absolutely nothing to do with this. And it's just amazing, man. It's like this system is broke. We need some serious reform, and you know, we need people like y'all to step up, because a lot of times these things happen because people sit down and they just don't step up. This is our system, this is our government, this is our world, and it's not going to change until good, solid people that know these things are happening take responsibility and step up, you know. And an amazing thing is they had eyewitnesses that saw the actual shooter. They had a man who confessed to the crime and said I had nothing to do with it, identified as co-defendant, and they still just went forward with this case. It's like I sit and I scratch my head day in and day out, and I say, you know, how do people do this? I mean, how do DAs know that this evidence is here and you can go forward and knowingly and deliberately and maliciously pursue a case when you know the person is not the person that did this crime? I don't know. I mean, I'm not bitter, but I'm shocked. I'm shocked, and it's just amazing that the level of evidence that they can have in their hands and continue with a case. It's amazing. 25 years of my life gone, and they knew they had the wrong man. The good thing is that the governor was going to cut me loose. Then he dropped the ball. Governor Spitzer was about to cut me loose. And then I guess he got caught up in his mess. And then, you know, that was in 2007. And then I stayed another 7-8 years before I went to the board. When I went to the parole board, even the parole board sat when I presented the evidence to them. They was like, why the courts didn't cut you loose? With all of this, what is going on? I said, I don't know. I guess maybe it has something to do with the color of my skin. I don't know. It's a whole lot of other factors. But even the parole board cut me loose with the help of Jeffrey Deskovich. He gave a letter and so forth, and the evidence that I had. And they was even shocked. So I walked out of prison with the parole board stamp of approval, like they couldn't even understand this. Nobody could understand what the hell is going on here. But welcome to America. And with that, thank you.
In terms of concrete steps that everybody can take, like I did mention to you, we are going to be pushing for discovery reform. So please, you can call your elected officials and say, look, we're in favor of discovery reform. So that's an important thing. And another thing is this: is, you know, if you call for jury duty, like, don't get out of it. Don't try to get out of it. Seriously, stay on. Try to get picked and really hold the prosecution to their burden of proof. And if they prove it, then you vote that way. But if they don't, then you got to, you know, then you have to vote not guilty. But too many of us get out of jury duty, and that's the end result of everything. And lastly, I mean, I think vote for candidates that are for change in the criminal justice system. If they're going to just maintain status quo and we just keep returning them to office, they're going to keep doing, you know, they're going to keep not taking action. So only when getting votes or not getting votes is going to be tied to how they vote on legislation. Until there's a change in the status quo, you know, things are going to keep happening. And so that's the point. That's the point of tonight. That's the point of the advocacy work I do in general. Just trying to let people see what's going on and hoping to get some reaction from people in terms of caring about justice reform. Because look, it happened to me. And it can happen to you.
Yeah, it's crazy.